The air in London felt different that morning. It was cool and quiet, as if the whole city was holding its breath. A light fog covered the streets, and the sound of footsteps echoed softly on the wet pavement. People were already lining up outside Westminster Abbey, wrapped in coats and flags, some holding hot drinks, others holding each other's hands. Many had camped out all night just to see a glimpse of something they would remember forever. Inside the grand old abbey, time seemed to stand still. Staff moved quickly but quietly. Florists added fresh white roses near the altar. Camera crews whispered as they made final checks. It was almost time. After 70 long years, the world was about to see the coronation of a new king. But this time, it felt more personal, more emotional. This wasn't just about a crown, it was about a man, a son, a father. In a quiet room not far from the main hall, Prince William stood in front of a tall mirror. He was dressed in a white shirt and dark trousers, but the ceremonial robe lay. Waiting nearby rich red velvet with gold embroidery, the sword of state rested on the table beside it. William looked at himself in the mirror, but he wasn't seeing just his reflection. He was thinking about everything that led to this day. His childhood, the loss of his mother, his years of training, the quiet moments, the public pressure, and the long shadow of responsibility that had followed him since he was a boy. He touched the ring on his finger. It was a gift from his wife, Catherine. It had a small diamond from Princess Diana's collection. William held it gently, remembering her face, her voice, her warmth. "I wish you were here, Mom," he whispered as Catherine entered the room, her dress shining like silver moonlight. She didn't say much, she didn't have to. Her presence alone was enough to calm him. She checked the robe, brushed something off his shoulder, and gave him a soft smile. He smiled back, but only for a moment. His hand still shook a little, not from fear, but from the weight of what was about to happen far outside. The city was alive with excitement. Flags waved in the cold wind. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, pointing at the huge screens showing live footage. Older people wiped their eyes, remembering when Queen Elizabeth was crowned. Tourists held phones high to capture every moment. Some were laughing, some were crying. All were waiting down in the Abbey. Important guests filled the seats. Presidents, prime ministers, royals from across the world. But near the front, there were also nurses, soldiers, teachers, and everyday citizens, people who had been invited to be part of this moment. William had wanted it that way. He didn't want this day to be just about tradition. He wanted it to feel real, that his children sat quietly with their mother, dressed in their royal clothes. They looked around the grand hall with wide eyes. They had practiced for weeks, but the moment still felt big to fully understand. Still, they sat tall, proud, and still, just like they were told. William took one last look out the window. The streets below were packed. Thousands of people had come to see him, to support him, to hope with him, and suddenly, he didn't feel nervous. He felt ready. The door opened. A royal guard stepped forward and nodded. It was time. William turned to Catherine. She reached out and took his hand for a second. "You've got this," she whispered. He nodded and stepped forward. The doors of Westminster Abbey swung open. The organ music began. William took his first step down the long aisle. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He walked slowly and with purpose. Every eye in the building turned toward him. Some people stood. Some held their breath. The weight of history, of family, of the crown itself, rested on his shoulders, but he did not falter. With each step, he walked closer to his destiny, not just as the next king, but as a man shaped by love, loss, and duty. In that moment, millions of people around the world leaned closer to their screens. They weren't just watching a ceremony. They were watching a story unfold, and it was only just beginning. The music inside Westminster Abbey was deep and powerful, filling every corner of the ancient walls. Each note echoed through stone arches and high ceilings, carrying a feeling that was hard to explain. It wasn't just music, it felt like a heartbeat of history. And in the center of it all, Prince William walked forward, his red and gold robe flowing behind him. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't look at the crowds. His eyes stayed straight ahead, focused on the altar, but his mind was full of emotion. This wasn't just a walk. This was a journey, a step toward a future he had always known would come but had never truly imagined until now. Behind him walked Catherine. Her dress moved like water, smooth and calm. She held her head high, calm as always, but her heart was full. She watched William closely, proud and steady. Behind her came their children, walking carefully with serious expressions. They had practiced this many times, but today was real, and they felt the weight of it. That the congregation stood as one, hundreds of faces, some known around the world, others quiet heroes of daily life. They had all come to witness this moment. Some had flown across oceans. Some had walked from nearby streets. But every single person in the room could feel something important was happening. Something different. That as William passed by, some people gently bowed their heads. Others simply watched, eyes wide with wonder. The silence was almost holy. Even those who had been unsure about the monarchy couldn't help but feel moved by the sight of the young prince, now a grown man walking the same path as so many kings before him. His father, King Charles III, sat at the front, his hands folded tightly. His face was still, but his eyes were full. He had waited many years for this moment, and now, as he watched his son take his place, he felt both pride and peace. He had done his part. Now it was William's turn. The Archbishop of Canterbury stepped forward. He held a small book in his hands, filled with ancient words. These were not just lines to be read, they were promises. Promises that had been made by every king and queen before. Words that tied the crown not just to power, but to duty, service, humility. That William knelt before the altar. He lowered his head, and the whole room seemed to hold its breath. The Archbishop's voice rang out clear and strong. He asked if William would serve with truth and justice, if he would protect the people and lead with heart. And with a calm, steady voice, William said yes. He didn't need to say more. His answer was enough. That next came the anointing. This was the most private and sacred part of the ceremony. A screen was placed around William, hiding him from the cameras and from most of the congregation. Only a few could see. The Archbishop dipped his fingers into the holy oil, made from olives grown in sacred land. Gently, he touched William's hands, his chest, and his head. This was not just tradition. This was something older than memory. A sign that this man was not just becoming a ruler, but someone chosen to serve. When the screen was taken away, William stood once more. His face was calm, but his eyes shone with something deep, like the sea on a clear day, still and strong, but full of hidden ties. That now came the crown, the St. Edward's crown, heavy and shining with gold and jewels, was lifted from its cushion. Everyone watched as it was raised into the air. For a second, time stopped. Then slowly, carefully, it was lowered onto William's head. And in that exact moment, something unexpected happened. A single tear rolled down his cheek. That it was small, silent, but powerful. The cameras caught it, and within seconds, millions of people around the world saw it. It wasn't a tear of fear. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of something much deeper: love, memory, pressure, and purpose all at once. Somewhere in the crowd, someone began to cry quietly. Then another, and Another, because that one tear said everything that it said. I remember my mother. It said, "This is bigger than me." It said, "I will do my best." And millions of people, from London to Australia to Canada and beyond, wiped their own eyes as they watched. They weren't just watching a coronation anymore. They were watching a man step fully into his destiny with his heart wide open, and they would never forget that moment. The tear on Prince William's cheek was still fresh when silence returned to Westminster Abbey. People inside the great hall did not move. They didn't speak. The moment had touched something deep in every heart. It was a tear that made a king feel human. It made him real. And in that stillness, the world leaned closer. Catherine watched from her seat, her hands resting on her lap. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry, not yet. She had known this moment would come. But watching William, the man she had loved for so long, crowned before the eyes of the world, stirred something powerful inside her. He wasn't just her husband anymore. He was now the King of England. Their children sat close, dressed like little royals, still and serious, but even they seemed to feel what had just happened. The oldest looked at his father with new eyes, as if realizing that everything had changed in one quiet second. The youngest, too small to understand it all, looked up at the shining crown with wide eyes, not scared, just curious. As the final prayers were spoken, the Archbishop gave the last blessing. The heavy crown stayed on William's head, its weight a reminder of everything he now carried. Then the Archbishop stepped back, giving William space to turn and face the people. It was the first time he stood as their king for a long moment. He didn't speak. He only looked, row by row, person by person. From royal guests in golden uniforms to nurses in blue dresses, he saw faces of every kind. He saw pride, he saw tears, and he saw hope. The camera crews continued to film, but even the reporters said nothing. Around the world, people watched in silence. Some held hands, others stood without realizing it. Across living rooms, town halls, and public parks, people didn't just see a crown, they saw something rare. Truth. In a world full of speeches and shows, this moment was real. The applause began softly. One pair of hands clapped in the middle row, then another and another. It was not planned. It was not part of royal protocol, but it grew until the entire abbey echoed with the sound of clapping. It was gentle at first, then stronger, like a wave of support moving through the room. It wasn't just for tradition, it was for the man beneath the crown. King Charles III wiped his eyes. He remembered his own coronation so many years ago, after his mother's death. That day had been hard, heavy, rushed, but this was different. It was full of grace. It was filled with feeling, and as he looked at his son, he knew the future was in safe hands. William took a deep breath. He stepped away from the altar and began to walk down the aisle, this time as king. Catherine followed, her steps light and sure. Their children walked behind, their small shoes tapping softly on the stone floor. The crowd inside stood again, watching every step as if it were part of a dream. When they reached the end of the aisle, something unexpected happened. William turned to his children. He knelt down before each of them, one by one. He spoke softly, his voice low and private. Nobody heard what he said, but the look on their faces changed. The oldest smiled a little. The youngest reached out and touched his father's hand. It was a small moment, but one that showed the world something beautiful. The cameras caught it all. The new king, in full royal robes and crown, kneeling before his children like a father at bedtime. No speeches, no formality, just love. That image spread quickly across the world. People shared it on phones and televisions. Newspapers called it the most touching moment of the day. Even people who didn't usually follow royal news felt something warm in their hearts. It reminded them that behind every leader, every crown, there is always a family. Back in the Abbey, the organ began to play again. It was time for the royal family to leave. Outside, thousands waited. They had heard the cheer. They had felt the moment through the screens. Now they were ready to celebrate. As William stepped out into the bright light, the sound of cheering filled the air. Flags waved wildly. Children shouted his name. Even the clouds seemed to part, letting sunlight fall onto the golden crown. He stood tall, not just as king, but as a man who had touched the hearts of millions, not with power, but with a single tear, a soft word, and the quiet love of a father. The golden crown still rested on Prince William's head as he stepped into the sunlight. Outside Westminster Abbey, the soft breeze moved the edges of his robe, and the sound of cheering filled the streets like a rising wave. People clapped, shouted his name, waved flags, and wiped tears from their eyes. It wasn't just noise, it was love. Pure, loud, and unforgettable love for a new king who had shown his heart to the world. The streets of London were packed, from rooftops to balconies. People leaned forward just to see him. Old men who had watched Queen Elizabeth's coronation in black and white now stood holding their grandchildren's hands. Teenagers who didn't care much for royal traditions before were now smiling with pride. Some had tears in their eyes and didn't even know why. It was more than a celebration, it was history, and it felt alive. The royal carriage, known as the Golden State Coach, stood waiting. Its shining gold sides reflected the sunlight. The horses were calm and strong, dressed in red and white. As William and Catherine stepped into the carriage, the crowd roared again. Their children followed, tired but proud, still dressed in their royal outfits. The doors closed, and the carriage began to roll slowly through the streets. All along the route to Buckingham Palace, people stood behind fences waving flags, clapping, cheering. Some reached out to pass him letters or flowers. Others just waved with all their strength, hoping he would see them, and he did. William looked out the window and saw them all, not just as faces in the crowd, but as people, his people. Inside the coach, Catherine held his hand. She gave him a small smile, quiet and full of love. "You did it?" she whispered. William nodded, but said nothing. He looked out the window again. His heart was full, so full it almost hurt. He didn't feel like a king wearing a crown. He felt like a man carrying a promise. When they arrived at Buckingham Palace, the gates opened wide. Guards stood tall, their faces serious, but even they couldn't hide the pride in their eyes. The royal family stepped out of the carriage. Cameras clicked from every angle. The palace behind them stood strong, proud, like it had for hundreds of years. But something felt new. Inside the palace, William paused for a moment. The crown was lifted gently from his head to give him rest from its heavy weight. His shoulders relaxed. His hair was flattened, but he didn't care. He took a deep breath and looked out one of the tall windows at the cheering crowd. He had never felt more ready. Then came the final moment, the balcony appearance. This was the tradition people waited for the most. It was the last scene of a royal day, a final image that would stay in people's minds forever. The same balcony where his grandmother had stood, the same balcony where he had waved as a little boy beside his mother. Now it was his turn. The crowd outside grew quiet for a second, like a breath being held. Then the balcony doors opened, and there he stood, King William V. By his side stood Catherine, strong and smiling. Their children stood between them, holding hands. The crowd below cheered louder than ever before. Flags waved high. Phones were held up. Some people simply closed their eyes to hold onto the feeling. It was a picture they would never forget. William raised his hand in a soft wave, not as a ruler looking down at his people, but as one of them. A son of Britain, a father, a servant to the nation. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The tear from earlier had already spoken for him. Later that evening, news stations across the world replayed the ceremony again and again. Every channel showed the same moment, the tear, the kneeling before his children, the wave on the balcony. Social media was flooded with photos, messages, and drawings from people everywhere. From New York to Nairobi, from Sydney to Singapore, people felt connected, not just to a king, but to a man who showed that even at the highest level of power, there can still be softness. There can still be heart. In schools, children were asked to write about the coronation. Some drew pictures of the crown, some drew the tear. One small boy wrote, "The king cried like me. That means he cares." And he was right. That day would be remembered not for its gold or grand buildings. It would be remembered for one man's quiet strength and the tear that touched the world.